Hello and welcome to Last Mixtape Podcast. My name is Stephen White, and on this week's show, we delve into Bob Dylan, a complete unknown, and the idea of artist identity, and the latest music from the week that was. But first, look out, kid, it's something you did, God knows when, but you're doing it again. The words of Bob Dylan from his famed track Subterranean Homesick Blues. And why, I hear you ask and see you ask, dear listeners and dear viewers of the podcast, are you quoting Bob Dylan at the very start of this week's podcast? Well, dear listener, I have been captivated by the new trailer for the brand new movie, A Complete Unknown, starring Timothée Chalamet in the role of Bob Dylan. And it's been making me muse a little bit on the idea of the biopic, and more broadly, the idea of our interpretation or our view of an artist, especially a musician. Now, I should say at the top of this, there's a fantastic video by Elliot Roberts on the movie I'm Not There, which we will get into, another Bob Dylan film. And you should definitely check that out because he goes into the actual filmic language of the movie itself and how it uses filmmakers of the time and documentary makers of the time, around the time, that the eras of Bob Dylan that it portrays, to really tell the story, and how it is a very interesting look at Dylan himself. Also check out Patrick H. Williams video about Dewey Cox and that movie as well, and kind of the idea of biopics too, and kind of a pitch of biopics, especially where musicians, and kind of the stereotypes and the I suppose the way of doing them, or the conventional way of doing them. But for this week's podcast, I did want to talk a bit about artist identity. Now, Bob Dylan is a very interesting one, and this is not a review of A Complete Unknown. It's obviously not out yet at the time of this video or making, and I'll definitely go see it and maybe review it here for the podcast too. But the idea of portraying Bob Dylan and Timothée Chalamet, it definitely fits the bill in terms of looks of a young Bob Dylan, especially around the era. I believe it's set around the Dylan Goes Electric era, which is cinematically probably, and from a narrative point of view, you can see why Hollywood would gravitate towards that particular era of Dylan. There would be a lot to chew on in terms of kind of the drama and, you know, the kind of the cries of Judas at him. You know, I believe somebody is portraying him. I think it's Edward Norton is playing Pete Seeger in the movie. So that's quite interesting, and it's quite an interesting period of his life. But the idea of condensing that down, and the idea of taking on a figure such as Dylan, is very interesting. Obviously, away from the kind of Bob Dylan, I'm gonna tell you all about my life going electric, that kind of idea, and away from the characterization or caricature of him. Now, I mentioned the movie I'm Not There, which is a Todd Haynes movie from 2007. Had Cate Blanchett, Heath Ledger, Richard Gere, and Christian Bale et al. Playing different versions, not of particularly of Bob Dylan, although they are very similar to Bob Dylan in some ways, but different iterations of different characters and different vignettes and times that are very much Bob Dylan, but ciphers almost, or fragments of the eras and personality and the music and the art of Bob Dylan. And it's a fantastic, fantastic movie. If you haven't seen it, do check it out. And as I say, check out that Elliot Roberts video on it, maybe after seeing the movie, because it has and does something with the role and the idea of Bob Dylan that made me want to kind of delve into this, which is music is something that we all experience audibly first. When you first hear a band, it's generally not a music video or anything like that. It's generally like maybe something on the radio, on your Spotify playlist. It might be anything like that, but it's auditory. And through that, I think it sparks imagination. And the more you delve into an artist, it's more conversational, rather, it's more audible than visual. You may know what the artist looks like, you may have seen interviews with them, you may have seen them live even, but your relationship with them is one of audio, one of listening to them. And you create as well, I believe, kind of an emotional connection to music. And it's not always sad emotions or low emotions. It can be like happy emotions, positive emotions, it can be dancing, whatever it is. Your idea of the artist is shaped partially through your imagination of them. And your idea of that music and how it should be portrayed and who the person is making is partially shaped through that as well. Now, there are parasocial elements of that, especially with modern times, with social media and stuff like that, that get on the kind of the more dangerous aspect of doing that kind of type of thing. But I'm talking more about your connection with music and how that informs an idea of an artist and how that artist lives up to or could be a part of that, and especially when it's portrayed on film. I think Timothée Chalamet is a fine actor, and I think he'll give a real go at playing Bob Dylan. But I don't think, supposing my own view, that he will be able to satisfy everyone. You know, Bob Dylan has been through so many eras in his career. He's a protest singer. Obviously, the Going Electric, which I imagine there will be a crossover in the movie about, the kind of the recluse after the motorcycle accident, the Rolling Thunder tour, Born Again, kind of Bob Dylan, the Dylan in the 80s, and this kind of, endless farewell tour that he's on. And I think there's so many different facets of it that are captured in the I'm Not There Todd Haynes movie, and given license to be more free with the interpretations and the idea of Bob Dylan, and also have the ability to be more honest. If you look at some of the more recent biopics about musicians, some have been quite kind, some have been quite heavily edited, some have not been, I would say, as interesting because of that, or even wholly truthful. I think if you look at the Elvis movie that came out, the Baz Luhrmann one that came out most recently, Baz Luhrmann again is a fine filmmaker and very stylistic one, but there are a lot of points in that movie in which certain things about Elvis's life are flattened down and kind of hand waved away, and it's kind of that type of thing. It's the same with Bohemian Rhapsody, where I really felt like this is the flattest version of the life of Freddie Mercury that you could possibly get. And I know it won Oscars and stuff, but Freddie Mercury was so alive and had such an appetite for life that it never really comes true in the movie. The kind of the humor, the kind of the campness, the brilliance, the bravado, all of that really doesn't come true. And you can kind of see, I suppose, in that way why the David Bowie estate had been reluctant for there to be a biopic about David Bowie. Much like Bob Dylan, he is a person in which his art spans many different personalities, many different characters, many different physical changes and everything like that. I think most recently as well, we could talk about Taylor Swift, somebody who actually really gets that idea because she's on an Eras tour, that there are different facets of her timeline, different Taylor Swifts that people connect to, the same way there's different David Bowies and different Bob Dylans that people connect to. The idea of a snapshot of a time, whilst interesting, has kind of been done before. And I think when it comes to musicians and it comes to their music, portraying them on film, I think with I'm Not There, and I think with Rocket Man as well, the Elton John movie, did really well too. It was a really creative way of doing it, of turning it almost into a musical that breaks the fourth wall, that it leans into the idea that the reason why we're so interested in these characters, the reason why we're so interested in their music, is the music itself and what it means to us. And yes, there is the element of what the artist meant and where the artist was and the story behind the songs, which a lot of the time is condensed to, that cliche. And it's the Patrick H. Williams one is really good at this, of just kind of like, people sitting in a room and all of a sudden they do the kind of din din ch, din din ch, oh, we will rock you. And it's like, hey, I like that, all those awful things. I think our view, though, of artists, our idea of them, is forever colored by our own perspectives, is forever colored by which era or what time we were at when we started loving their music. I think that's why some of us delve into some music more deeply. I love Bob Dylan. I love his albums. I am by no means a Bob Dylan aficionado. I do not know the time of day it was when he wrote Like a Rolling Stone, and I don't know what he had for breakfast when he wrote Tangled Up in Blue, but I can tell you that I love those songs. I can tell you how they make me feel. To me, Bob Dylan is a titan. It's almost, in musical terms, he's up there in the kind of the Mount Rushmore. It's almost, he's monumental. He is a monolith. He is something that is almost unattainable. And you can see why that is unattainable in movies, and why a film like I'm Not There splits him up into these different characters. I mean, the Heath Ledger character is an actor playing Bob Dylan in a movie. And, which is really interesting. Kate Blanchett gives such an amazing performance as actually this era of Bob Dylan that Timothée Chalamet is going to play. The kind of the electric kind of cat-like almost Bob Dylan at that time. And yeah, it's such an interesting movie because of that, because it I think it accepts that to the audience, to the fan, to everything. And most artists are a myriad of things, especially the big ones. As I say, the David Bowies, the Bob Dylans of the world, the Taylor Swifts even, who have so many different periods of their music that it's hard for any one thing to be it. I think that's why it's so difficult for us to capture in movies and film what a musician means to us or what an artist means to us, because we're trying to condense everything down into a story narrative that life doesn't follow, unfortunately, and art doesn't follow. It's not neat, it's ragged, it's uneven, it's abstract. Who the artist even thinks they are is completely different than what the audience thinks they are. Like we were talking about it, I was on recently on a panel in BIM, and I was with Nyler Nine and Zara Hederman, and we were talking a little bit about being ahead of the curve, or trying to create music that is authentic to you. And it really did make me muse on the idea of authenticity. And Dylan is somebody who is incredibly authentically inauthentic at times. Like his interviews were quite evasive. His answers were filled, with untruths. He created a version of himself. There's an interview with him and Ed Bradley on 60 Minutes where he says, he's asked about, obviously his name is not Bob Dylan, it's Robert Zimmerman. Why change your name to Bob Dylan? He's like, it's the land of the free. Well, I can do whatever I want. I can be whoever I want. And that is, in essence, what it is to be an artist, isn't it? I can be whatever I want, whenever I want. So the idea of authenticity may be in certain cases of, I went down the field and I drank some cans and I went to Super Value, which is cool. That's fine. That's great. And it can be authentic, but also authenticity can be authentic creativity and creative imagination. And that could be, it could be, I danced with polar bears in the supermarket, it could be something like that. But the idea is that authenticity is the creativity that it comes from, is the creativity coming from an authentic place. It doesn't even really matter whether or not the narrator is reliable. Is Bob Dylan a reliable narrator? No. And I don't think he's ever pretended to be. His interviews, certainly, his music even, have made him sometimes the kind of unreliable narrator. Even his most hard-hitting stuff like Mr. Jones. So I think looking at this movie, looking at A Complete Unknown, which I really hope is a good movie, and I hope as a movie it works, and as a story it works. I know it's from the same director as Walk the Line, so that was really good at condensing a very dramatic life of Johnny Cash and putting it into something that it was quite narratively satisfying. But Dylan is different, and Dylan is quite hard to do, I think. And yes, I can see why they would go with the electric era of him. I once saw Bob Dylan play Kilkenny in Ireland in Nolan Park, and this is many, many years ago. That actual same gig, the Flaming Lips played it, and they were in the big hamster ball and going over the crowd. But the one thing that struck me is I went up, all my friends were kind of like sitting at the back, and everyone was a lot of people were kind of sitting on the grass and stuff like that. But I wanted to get closer, so I kind of pushed my way through the crowd as far as I could kind of get to that wall, that wall when you go to a gig where you're not getting any further into the crowd. Like, these are people who are like, they've been there for ages. They're committed. They're going to be in those couple of front rows. But I got as close as I could get to see Bob Dylan, and he was kind of just part of the band. He was almost in the corner playing a piano, singing his songs in different styles from the recorded versions and the ones that we were used to. But I was in close proximity of it, and he was so almost mysterious and understated. He's a mysterious character. The mystery of the artist to us, especially as music fans, is always something that I think is interesting to hold on to, and that we should hold on to, because it's an idea within us, the artist and their art. It is something we hold to us, and it plays into the idea of the death of the author, The idea that the creator of the art is not as important to us, or shouldn't be as important to us, as the art itself. Bob Dylan is a multitude of different people. As I say, he's a protest singer. He's the electric Dylan. He's a recluse. He is the born-again Christian. He is the 80s Dylan. And he is the never-ending tour Dylan. How you can condense that in a movie, I don't know. I'd love to see it. I can't wait to see A Complete Unknown. But I think it's worth checking out I'm Not There as an idea of the abstraction of and the fragmentation of an artist and their art, and even divorcing it so far away from who the artist is, their name isn't even used. They're given different names, and it's not the same actor, and it's not even the same gender of actor playing them. It's Kate Blanchett playing Bob Dylan, and really exploring what actually that person means to a multitude of people. I think that's the most interesting thing, and that's what that trailer made me think of. It looks amazing. He sounds kind of like Bob Dylan, talking like this. But I think whether or not we'll ever truly capture the idea of an artist, whether a film can truly capture an idea of the artist, I think I'm Not There comes really, really close. But what do you think? Are you excited to see A Complete Unknown, the movie, and Timothée Chalamet playing Bob Dylan in very much a very interesting period of his life? I would say actually check out No Direction Home as well, the Martin Scorsese documentary, because that is absolutely fantastic, with some great interviews with some great people, especially a fellow Waterford man, Liam Clancy. And I think that's such an interesting documentary around that time too. But yeah, what do you think? Are you excited to see it? What movies do you think live up to the artist that you love? It might not necessarily be a musician. It could be a painter or a dancer or something like that. But yeah, do you believe that films like this can capture musicians and their entire career? Or is it best to take a snapshot? Or is it best to go more abstract like I'm Not There? And if you've seen I'm Not There, what do you think of it? Yes, they seek him here, they seek him there, those musos seek him everywhere. Is he in heaven or is he at the disco? That damned elusive Count of Monte playlist. Oh yes, dear listener, the style and profile limousine riding Jeff Line, playlist making son of a gun, has once again returned to the shores of playlist here to bring you another beautiful bounty in the form of TLMT's Irish mixtape on Spotify. Shall we begin? I think we shall. This week with Aoife Wolf and her brand new single, Bristle of Delusion. And this is a buzzing, fuzzing, menacing music from Aoife Wolf with a commanding central performance from the artist herself. This is a incredibly bristly, as the title of the track would say, but it just has a presence to it. It has a texture to it. It has an edge to it that really comes to the fore through both the lyrical content and through Aoife Wolf's performance, which, as I say, stands front and centre in a commanding form at the middle of this kind of fuzzing, buzzing kind of sound. And yeah, it really is one that kind of starts with a snarl and contains a growl within it. And yes, Bristle of Delusion from Aoife Wolf kicks off this week's playlist. Be sure to go and check it out, or check out Aoife Wolf's music however you want to. I am not the boss of you. I am merely the Count of Monte playlisto. But next up on the playlist itself, we have Kinsey and Utopia, and this is the title track from the EP of the same name. Now, Stereo Games was one of the tracks we featured a couple of weeks ago. It comes from this EP, and we're looking at Utopia, which is a far more slow burn, atmospheric feel to it, especially to the verses, but it also contains the big choruses and the big kind of pop aspect that is at the heart of Kinsey's more indie sound that has shades of 90s alt rock to it in the kind of the edges of the guitars and the phrasing and the chords played. And yeah, once again, Kinsey really showing herself to be a songwriter and an artist with a very defined sense of self, sense of her own sound, sense of the power behind her songwriting and how to portray it and how to present it. Utopia and the EP itself is a great, once again, another snapshot of Kinsey, and also a showcase of just how patient an artist she is. She's not going straight to the album straight away. She's building up that momentum, building up that interest, and really building it up with songs that are really compelling and show different facets of her as a songwriter. Utopia from the EP of the same name. It's a great track, slow burn indie with big, as I say, yeah, big moments in it. It's a song that has kind of big moments in it, that has nice builds, but at the bottom of it is this real atmospheric and bristly sound to it, which I really like. Up next, we have Chubby Cat and their brand new single, Got Hope. And this one is kind of rhythmically intertwined with the vocal on this one. It's very interesting how those two elements play. And it's very interestingly presented in terms of being I suppose you would kind of put it maybe in the alt-pop era. And it does fit in with that. But the most interesting part, as I say, is just how the beat and how the vocal play and the relationship between the two. Because Chubby Cat's vocal is quite, I would say, kind of acrobatic in how it moves. It has a kind of a flow to it that kind of just threads itself in around the beats, in those kind of spaces and places within the beat of the track as well. And the beat too has a real great presentation to it. It's very contemporary to now. It really has a sound that you could feel would be played on radio, but it would also grab the attention as being something different and new. So yeah, that is Got Hope from an artist that, yeah, has been really kind of coming up in a lot of ways. Got nominated for a Choice Prize last year. So yeah, Chubby Cat with another great release. Check it out. It's on a playlist. Up next, we have FA and You Say That I'm Crazy. And this is a really delightful track. Yeah, a real dreamlike, lo-fi, hazy little number. I think it's around only about 2 minutes, not even 3 minutes long. And it just has a really nice presence to it, a really nice feel to it, really soft, hushed vocal as well. That really kind of gives a real taster of FA as a artist and as a performer and as a songwriter, and has a stylization to it within that lo-fi-ness. It doesn't break the edges of it where it's so lo-fi that it's almost kind of incomprehensible. It has a kind of a feel of almost a track coming off a worn tape cassette or something like that. Tape cassettes were a means of listening to music many moons ago. And yeah, I really like it for its presentation, its feel. It's kind of laid back. It's as I say, it's dreamlike and hazy and brilliant. And yeah, it has a succinctness to it that really speaks to me. So yeah, that is FA and the brand new single, You Say That I'm Crazy. Up next, we have Roe with Swimming Pool. And Roe's been featured on the podcast and on the YouTube series here on a number of occasions, and once again getting featured. And it's interesting to see, yeah, we continue to see the evolution of Roe into kind of more harder, more indie sounds. And this is incredibly buzzsaw and edged and angular and pointed even vocally, and in terms of the guitar playing and the musicality of it, which, as I say, plays into the kind of harder, again, almost a harder version of what we were saying with kind of Kinsey and the 90s alt rock sound. Really plays into it, and she's added that texture to her music and added that kind of genre flourish that really, I think, gives it that step up and really gives it that interest. And it's great to see Roe evolve into this artist where the music, yeah, has that weight to it, has that feel to it, and the songwriting that has always been so raw and always been so personal and relatable now has this this sound as well, and the production too, to capture that sound that feels weighty and immediate and very relevant. So yeah, that is Roe with Swimming Pool. Be sure to check it out. Up next, we have a little bit of a throwback one. Taylor D with Lost in London. This was released maybe 2 weeks ago and came back into my scope of being and into the Count of Monte playlisto's sphere. And yeah, I really like this for its big indie popness. It reminds me quite a bit of early 2000s era kind of music, where that kind of that Londonness, Lost in London, really has a real good name for it, because it has that feel to it of that era of British indie of the time of the early 2000s, and it really captures it too, and it has the space and the production to do it, and it also has the songwriting to do it as well. Because when you're doing something like this, when you're doing something that has that indie pop feel of it, especially one that would, I suppose, now be considered retro, it has to capture a certain something. It has to capture the cinematic. It has to capture the imagination. And I think, yeah, Taylor D an interesting track, Lost in London. Be sure to check it out. But up last this week, we're going to end with Pastiche and her brand new single, Abandon the Planet. Brand new single from her, and a return to the big, bold, stylistic electro music from Pastiche. And yeah, again, this one is quite darkly lit as well. It's interesting that the actual visuals themselves to this music is. Again, that's going to come something that comes hand in hand with Pastiche as well, which I really appreciate. Artists that kind of take in the artistry of their music through all facets, through the audio and the visual elements to it as well. And she is an artist that kind of creates these, I would say, yeah, there's a dark backbone and there's a darkly lit element to the music, whilst also having a danceability to it and a pop element to it as well. So it really plays into that all pop sound, whilst having that kind of electro feel to it, really, that is hidden within the beats. The performativity of it and the performer that Pastiche is as well is something that really pulls it through and keeps her right at the center of the song, where you want your vocal to be and where you want your solo artist to be, at the center of things, in the spotlight. And having that kind of darkly lit sound around it really gives it that contrast and that feel of foreground and background to it. And yeah, once again, Pastiche, a really interesting artist that is evolving. We were saying that like a Chubby Cat, and we were saying it like a Kinsey and Aoife Wolf and Rowe as well. All really artists who are growing with each new release and really finding themselves and finding that sound and that way of communicating and that language of their own music. And Pastiche is definitely one that is doing that and building momentum. But she is the final pick in this week's playlist by the count of Monty Playlisto. There will be more picks next week. The count shall return after a week of delving into more new Irish tunes. But you can check out all this week's picks on TLMT's Irish Mixtape on Spotify. But for now, the count is out of here. So it goes, and there it went. But before I go, thank you for listening and viewing the Last Mixtape podcast here on Apple, on Spotify, and indeed on YouTube through the visual realms. You can submit all the music for the count of Monty Playlisto to me at stephen.thelastmixtape.com, and I'll be sure to hand them on for next week's playlist. I'm sure the count will be delving into new music. Oh, sounded a little bit like him, but be sure, listener, I am not him. He's somebody different. Enough of that though. But for now, that was Last Mixtape Podcast. I was Stephen White. You are the listener and the viewer. Hey, so long.